Welcome to this episode of Authenticity FM. I'm your host, Mike Sable. I'm joined, as always, by my friends and colleagues, Phil Corrali and Corey Spiegel. If you've ever wondered how a Canadian tuxedo, a compass, improv, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and bow ties can be wrapped up into one coherent framework, stay tuned. We'll see you on the other side. So a little bit of explanation is necessary. So Canadian tuxedos, for people who are from the North, is this all denim suit that people would wear. And there is a Canadian crooner named Gordon Lightfoot. He was famous for wearing this all denim tuxedo. It was amazing. He's got an amazing voice. And he actually sang the Edmund Fitzgerald. And so there's a tie of this episode to the Edmund Fitzgerald. Compass is always a good one. So the folks on the Edmund Fitzgerald probably should have had a better compass. They could have avoided some disaster and some loss of life. But how compasses play an important role in our profession. I want to talk about improv, the ability to make stuff up as you're doing it, of which a little bit of this is we're doing right now. Arnold Schwarzenegger is actually a tie-in to the movie Predator, which is a tie-in to Feather Boas, which is a tie-in to Jesse, the body Ventura. I promise there's a Jesse Ventura story. And then lastly, bow ties. How does a bow tie worn by a little kid shape an incredible and illustrious career as a city manager? All of those things are wrapped up in my friend and colleague, Craig Rapp. Craig, welcome to Authenticity FM.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Corey. Thanks, Phil. Love being here.
So we are excited. So Craig, we have known each other for a long time. I lost track of how many years, but you have been in the profession of local government management for a very long time, and maybe even something that might have started in childhood. So for the benefit of our listeners, give us the rundown, kind of 30 seconds. How did you get into this business and what are you doing right now?
All right, 30 seconds. I usually give people 30 seconds to do something like this in one of my workshops, and now the tables are turned on me. 30 seconds. I almost didn't get into this profession. I was a sophomore in my undergraduate year, and I was going to quit in the second semester. My girlfriend at the time, who became my wife, later said, just hang in one more couple of classes, just see how it goes. Took my first public administration course and I was hooked. And there's more to that story, but I will tell you that launched me in a different direction and to when I got into city management. What I'm doing now, I'm still hanging around city managers. I haven't been able to kick my habit. It's in February, it'll be 48 years later from that first day on the job. And I am now a consultant as opposed to in service as a city manager.
So how did you get that first job? Where was it? What were the circumstances? How does this journey begin?
It was, pretty pedestrian and frankly, quite similar to most people when they go through this process, get a master's degree. I was going through my MPA program at, it's now called Minnesota State Mankato. It was called Mankato State back then in Minnesota. I was doing an internship with the city of Rochester, and I met a lot of cool people there, some great people in the profession. At the end of my internship, they offered me a job, but I just hesitated just enough to say, I want to get up to the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, try my luck there. And sure enough, I got a job in the city of New Brighton as the assistant to the city manager. That was my first job.
So I'm going to disagree with Mike's 30-second time limit on you. I feel like there is a whole lot more to this story that we should hear.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I'll give you the quick rundown on my city management or local government career. So I would maybe take a half step back and say I've really had two halves of my professional and working life and maybe 3 to 4 careers, depending on how you slice and dice it. I'll start by saying that I am extraordinarily fortunate. I've had an amazing life. I've had amazing opportunities. I would say that the first half was a striver, like many people. I had that first job, and then, crazily enough, a city council handed a 25-year-old guy the keys to the kingdom, and I became a city administrator in a small town in the metropolitan area of Minneapolis-St. Paul called Circle Pines. I went on after 5-6 years there to the city of Hopkins, then to the city of Brooklyn Park. There's some stories associated with that we can get into in greater detail later. I transitioned from there to the Metropolitan Council, which is a unique agency across the country. frankly, it was the best job I ever had in my professional local government life. And then when I left there, that was roughly 22 years in local government service. For the last 25 years, I've done a couple of things. And I would say, while I was a striver in those first 22 years, I would call myself a seeker in the last 25 years. Wandered in the wilderness for about 5 years after leaving local government. I worked for a real estate developer, doing new urbanist housing. I transitioned from that to running a planning and urban design firm for a short period of time. I thought enough of myself. I was patting myself on the back, a lot, and saying, "Oh, you'd be a tremendous consultant." So, without knowing how to be a consultant or what the hell I was doing, I tried that, and it was kind of a face plant and a little bit of a learning experience, but a lot of folks saw me out in the field, and I got picked up by a consulting firm. I had a couple of offers, learned how to be a consultant at that point. And so I was out doing things in the field. Bob O'Neill and I kept running into each other. Bob O'Neill, former executive director of ICMA, kept running into each other at state association meetings. By this time, I'm already doing workshops for ICMA. I'm running around the country doing speeches and what have you. And Bob and I would be on the elliptical machines next to us in the gym at the hotel, and we'd be talking about, what does life mean? And so finally, he offered me an opportunity at ICMA to start the consulting practice there. And that was 2006, 2007. Spent the next 4 years roughly at ICMA running the consulting practice, the first person to do that. The good news is it was great for a couple of years. The bad news is it was not so great for a couple of years, because we all know what happened in 2008, 2009. I was building this practice up. I had some great experiences, but I had to then start laying people off, and eventually they closed down a portion of it, spun off another portion of it. The good news for that, and the good news for me, is that I landed on my feet. I decided to move to Chicago. I set up my own practice there. That's where I met people like Phil, but probably met Phil actually earlier than that, because I was doing some ICMA work in both Illinois and Michigan. However, I did have a connection with NIU's, Center for Governmental Studies, and I had an 8-year contract with them to do some work. So when I did work in Chicagoland, I would work through them, and when I would work in other states and other places, I used my own firm. So for the last 15 years, roughly, I've had my own businesses. I have two. I have one, which is Craig Rapp LLC, which is Rapp Consulting Group. And then since 2011, I've had Compass Peer Groups, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that. So that's a very long, that's the longer than 30-second version, Corey, of where I've been and what I've been doing.
A very worthy version of an illustrious career. So there are a couple of things you said that just ping-ponged around, and it reminded me of something I read today. So we're going to see Dr. Arthur Brooks at ICMA coming up. And his post today, as of the day we're filming this, is "Reinvention at 45 isn't weak. You're supposed to change. That's a normal and healthy thing." So when you talked about kind of reinvention and failure, I think as a growth opportunity, right? I think, at least, and I'm in the middle of the walking around the desert phase of my career right now, which is super fun to be a production intern for a podcast while I'm walking around the desert. But
tough bosses, though.
Bosses.
Okay,
like
how about this? How about
it's like having brothers.
Tough underlings, tough colleagues, tough fill in the blank, right? Yes. Okay.
They're great. They're like
we're
the
like
brothers
the
I
worst
never
employees. Had. We're the worst employees you could ever imagine.
Yes.
That is
right.
Mike and I.
But
wait a minute.
So
we don't get paid to do this, do we?
Corey.
Sorry,
That
doesn't not make us the worst employees. I just point
also
out
true.
that for
Corey,
right.
Corey, it's just you and me here. Come on, we're just you.
I'm
just
used to this. This is normal. You get paid in love and adoration, and
That's
me
it.
cutting out all the crazy stuff that actually happens. So, but dive into that a little bit, because you did talk. There were some
Sure.
very distinct
Right.
chapters, I would call them, and very thoughtful transitions that I suspect happened with those chapters.
Yeah, and I don't want to make light of that and gloss over it too much because frankly, those are core to my journey. If I think about my life just generally, and there's the personal and professional weave together in this, and I'm a big fan of Arthur Brooks. I do a lot of workshops that I'm doing one in a couple of months on life mapping. I've done it for ICMA. I did a whole purpose. I did a whole bunch of workshops on purpose. I learned how to do purpose planning and purpose discovery from Richard Leiter, the #1 purpose guy in the United States. He's a Minnesotan too. But the fact of the matter is, I came to all of that from a place of brokenness is maybe too strong, but I got fired very spectacularly in at the city of Brooklyn Park. I like to say it this way. My first job was an assistant with the city of New Brighton, and within 10 months, my boss got fired. About 8 or 9 months later, I got my first job. I followed a city manager who had been fired. About 5.5 years later, I got my second city manager job following somebody who had just been fired. 4.5 years later, I got my third city manager job following somebody who had just been fired. And just to round out the experience, they fired me. Or as I like to say, I came in the door, I left the organization the same way I came in the door, fired with enthusiasm. So the idea here is that when you're 41 years old and you've had 17 years or 22 years or whatever the heck it was at that point, 17, I guess, and you're out of a job and you have 4 children and you're looking around saying, okay, what's next? I think I'm marketable. People seem to tell me I do good things. Where do I go from here? And simultaneous with that, I had one of my children was struggling mightily with a variety of addictions. I had a marriage that was falling apart. I just had a bunch of other stressors that were all sort of circling, and I kind of felt like I was circling the drain, frankly. I did get some help, professionally, and that was, tremendously useful in my life, and I still continue that to this day. And I had a city manager friend, Mike will know him, a guy named Dave Childs. He's a former president of ICMA. He's a storied city manager. He was in Minnesota for many years, but then he was in California for many, many years. And Dave had just gone through the similar set of circumstances that I had gone through. And I ran into him at a meeting and I said, hey, can we have a drink? And so that started weekly Dave and Craig having a beer, talking about life and marriage and kids and the profession and all of that. And that, to this day, Dave is still among my 2 or 3 closest friends in the world. And that helped to sustain me until I got that next job. Fast forward, it's 2009. So that's age 41. Fast forward, we're now at 2009, 2010, actually 2010. I'm 56. And at that point, ICMA decides to close down the management services portion of consulting services. And so I had just been laying people off, and then I was out on the street. So I again had to decide, what do I do? And, I would be lying if I said that it wasn't stressful or I didn't have moments of doubt. However, I tend to keep pushing forward. I look around and say, do I have people that can tell me the truth, tell me honestly, do I have value? Am I good at what I do? Do I have prospects? Can you help me see through the fog that I'm in right now? And if I'm talking to someone in the profession early on, or maybe going through what I went through, I would tell you that it's absolutely critical to have people in your circle, both in the profession and not in the profession, who know you, who can look you in the eye and say, you have value, I can see what you can't see, and here's what I'm seeing. But they will also tell you, if they are truly your good friends, what's on your side of the street. What you should deal with, what you need to clean up, or things that maybe in the midst of all the chaos, they didn't really want to interject at that moment. But now that the chaos has ended, or you're in some place where you can hear that message, they will give you that message. So that's a very long answer to that, but I would tell you that everyone in this profession is going to have some kind of bump in the road. It's not just the CAO, it's going to be the ACAO. It could be the police chief. It could be anybody who's on the line in public, getting attacked on social media, whatever it might be. You're going to have those moments, and you might lose your job. And it comes. Normally, you see it coming, but sometimes it comes out of the blue, and you're gone. So you do need that support system, and you need to plan for that before you need it.
So, Craig, this podcast is called AuthenitiCity FM for a reason, right? This is real people. This is real stories. This is about the work that we do that we love so much. I want to acknowledge and say thank you for sharing that in the most authentic way possible. I've heard the story before. I'm always inspired by it. I always this is the time of the show where I get goosebumps. I got them again. So I appreciate it. And thank you for modeling what courage looks like in a professional. So I just felt
Thank you.
obligated to say that. It means a lot to us who are sort of like, boy, am I not supposed to say anything? Can I do this? And to have somebody go up and actually just do it and deliver it really well is great. So thank you.
Well, I've been thinking about that because I know that you talk a lot about authenticity here, and I wanted just to offer freely, do with it what you wish. But I have a new tagline for your podcast: authenticity. Once you can fake that, you've got it made.
We'll write that down. That's a good one.
You can workshop that one for a while, see what happens there. Okay.
So, I mean, Craig, listening to your career path is kind of a unique Renaissance man-esque, just something that as you talk about the number of years that you've done something, it's fascinating to me that you've not been a city manager longer than you were. And yet I can't discern you as anything but a city manager.
Yeah.
The way I see you, and I've probably known you, well, I would say I first met you probably 20 years ago. I would say I didn't really get to know you till maybe 10 years ago. No, a little more than that, about 12 or 13. And you've always been a person that I have seen as the confident, knows what they're doing, has it pulled together, can tell other people how to pull it together, can help them get to that place that they may not see themselves getting to, and that you have been kind of the advocate that somebody needed. And what I think is powerful about your story is that, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, it feels to me like you channeled difficulty in your own life to give back and help others find a path. And I think, the story I'll tell relative to you is we brought you in. I was a brand new village manager in Glencoe. We had done an RFP process before I got there to bring in a strategic plan facilitator. We were going to do our first strategic plan.
Right.
And, I'm this 33-year-old kid who's been given this task of trying to come up with what the hell we're going to do. And I remember, working with the village president, who was not 33, and did not want to treat me like anything other than a child. And sitting down with the two of you, as we sat to try to come up with how this process was going to work. And I remember you picked up exactly when I needed you to pick up the conversation to bring us forward and to say the things that I wasn't ready to say. I wasn't comfortable saying. I wasn't able to say yet. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my God, someday I hope to be like that, because he knew what had to get said when it needed to be said. And I think about how that helped me. And it was a short window of time that we worked together, but such
Yeah.
a meaningful time for me as a brand new manager to be able to have somebody be there. And I think it just speaks to the power of that relationship and the way that you could enter a situation. How how do you do it? How do you do it?
Well, I'll give you two answers to that. One that sort of just comes probably innately from me. I do a lot of work in my purpose workshops on talking about sort of nature versus nurture. Are you a born leader? Do you learn to be a leader? All those kinds of things. And I'm a firm believer that there are certain things in everyone that you just gravitate to. So if you think about what were the things that you naturally did when you were in junior high school? Were you the one that says, let's go over and do this, or were you the one waiting, or were you the one sitting quietly in the corner reading a book? Who were you, right? I'm the one who was, leading the charge. I'm the one who was interpreting all the stuff that was going on because I could kind of tune into the politics of the situation. That's just who I am. And I stumbled into a career that enabled me to use those powers. Now, how I ended up in the situation that you mentioned, I was lucky enough to hire a consultant who he modeled for me without even me completely appreciating it at the time, but years later I did. I brought him in to do a team building thing, and he pulled me aside at 2 or 3 different points along the way. And he just said, hey, this guy isn't your friend. He's not helping you. He's undercutting you. He's doing this. He's doing that. And I'd never had a consultant that told me the truth that way, or that did the kinds of things that I needed the consultant to do for me on my behalf. And I've always remembered that. I may not have done it well. I may have run into counsels that pushed back too hard and I had to back off, or I had to, compromise in some way. But at the end, and I'm still learning. I'm still learning at my age. I still run into situations that baffle me. But ultimately, I've had enough experience so that I can sort of weave my way through, and I already know 100% what the manager needs. And so I've been in that chair. I have worked with hundreds, if not thousands of those folks over the years, certainly hundreds in a direct way and thousands in a teaching way, so that I hear those stories, I hear what they struggle with, and I understand what they need.
So at the opening, I said I made a reference to Canadian tuxedos, which is a reference to Gordon
Right.
Lightfoot, which is a reference to Edmund Fitzgerald, which is a reference to oar boats. You have a weird connection to oar boats. Describe them for me a little bit, and maybe for the audience. What are we
Yeah.
talking about? And also, if you could extend your Minnesota accent and say boat as long as you
Minnesota
can.
and boat. I take you back to Minnesota on the boat, and I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota. I have worked my entire GD life trying to get rid of my Minnesotan accent, but it does slip in. And since you asked me to display it. Now, I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota, and anyone from some other part of the world who doesn't know where Duluth is, it is the westernmost point of the Great Lakes. It is on Lake Superior, the largest freshwater lake in the world. But that is where a lot of boats, and oar boats in particular, for the early part of my life, what's called the Iron Range of Minnesota, which is adjacent to and near Duluth and Lake Superior, all of this iron mining, it was a #1 iron mining vein in the world at one point. So as a kid, I'm watching these trains come down. They would dump their iron ore loads onto ore boats, right? And so these boats would then transition to the eastern part of the Great Lakes, and ultimately Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and all the places that did the steel making would use that iron ore. My grandfather was a ship captain on an ore boat. Not only my grandfather, but 2 of his brothers and 2 of his brother-in-laws. I had 5 members of that generation who were all captains on the Great Lakes. And so as a 5 or 6-year-old boy, I took a trip from Duluth to Buffalo with my grandfather, one of the sharpest memories I have from early life. And I heard nothing but stories of the lakes and all of that as a kid. Oh, and to tie it back to Gordon Lightfoot. So the Edmund Fitzgerald, probably people know about that famous crash, happened in 1975. My grandfather was personal friends with the captain of that boat, and he told me the day it happened that that guy was just getting ready to retire when he went down with the ship too, which is making it, 2 more levels of sad.
I think the 50th anniversary is coming up on November 10th.
It is.
Just
I
a
was
few
watching
weeks
a
out.
Monday night football game, and they broke in to talk about the crash. And I called my grandfather right after that. He told me in detail. He says, "I can tell you exactly what they're going to find when they find that ship." And he described it was at the time the longest boat on the Great Lakes. And I won't bore you with the details, but it was crazy that I was able to get kind of a peek behind the curtain and all of that stuff at that time.
So Corey brags about being the production intern, and somehow within all of this stuff, we will probably see a photo of a young Craig Rapp.
Yes,
There's
yes.
evidence of that. Talk about sort of your early upbringing and sort of like this. You were a city manager in training as a probably 3, 4, 5-year-old.
I was born a city manager. My mother knew this at age 3. She combed my hair much as it is combed right now. I haven't been able to emerge from that. I don't wear bow ties anymore, for those of you who are seeing that now on screen. But at the end of the day, I really did. I grew up in a family of so one generation was all ship captains. The next generation, my father's generation, were all teachers. My dad and his 3 brothers, teachers. One of them was a professor, but aunts and sister-in-laws of them, they were all teachers. So I had real indoctrination into service and teaching. And frankly, I wanted to be a teacher. My dad, who was a teacher, dissuaded me from that. He said, "There's a glut in the market when you're going to come out. You don't want to do that. So go find something else to do," which is probably fortunate for me. I ended up in a career that matched. But weirdly, as I think forward, what do I do? What is most of what I do? I do workshops. And in fact, I'll just throw this statistic out. So when I left 22 years of local government service, shortly after that, Dave Childs, again, emerges into this scenario. I was having nothing but craziness going on in my last job, where Jesse Ventura was the mayor of my community, and we can get into that separately. But we were the #1 show on cable television. All the Boy Scout troops would come to our city because they needed a merit badge for, civics, and they wanted to go get that handed to them, a signed photo from Jesse the Body. Anyway, I used to have our cable folks make a copy of the meeting, a videotape of the meeting. And then I would take those videotapes down to the PA program at Mankato and scare the hell out of the students by showing them what it was really like. And I got kind of locally famous for doing that. And so Dave Childs, at some point, he goes, "You've got to bring this show to ICMA." And I said, "No, I don't want to. I don't really care." He says, "Well, it's too late. I've already convinced them that you have this great workshop that you will do." And in probably 2002 was the first time I unveiled managing in a difficult political environment or dysfunctional political environment, depending on when you heard me. I did that along with Baldridge, along with lean thinking, along with life mapping. I had carte blanche at ICMA to do any kind of workshop that I wanted to do. But I started with managing in difficult political environments. And I've been in 35 states and provinces across North America at state associations. I kind of had an unbroken streak of about 15 years doing multiple sessions at ICMA annual conference. And so all of that leads to the idea that I don't even know where this question started. I just know that I can't stop talking. The idea here is that all of my early upbringing on teaching and service, and then I think what ultimately happened was I was in speech and debate when I was in high school. I naturally took to that. I loved it. that also kind of helped me to see that I had some power in how I'm able to articulate things, how I can formulate arguments, what I can do with that. And ultimately, that took me to where I'm at today.
I
Pregnant
think the
pause.
first I think the first time I encountered you was at probably the ICMA conference in Minneapolis.
Oh, yeah.
I believe you
Yeah.
gave that session. It was a pre-conference
Yep.
early session on
Yep.
like Saturday or
Yep.
Sunday. And look,
Yep.
I was a kid. I didn't know anything, but I knew who you were
Yep.
because
Yep.
I remembered the kind of the story about what it was like for Jesse Ventura to be
Yep.
mayor and then ultimately become the governor of Minnesota. And there was this guy, the city manager, who played a very prominent role in that story. And that was one of the reasons I went to the session, because I had to see it. And I remember you being just very uniquely at the time, I felt like uniquely
Yeah.
honest about the
Yeah.
experiences that you had gone through, and they were
Yeah.
complicated at least.
Yeah.
This may be a good time to pull on that string a little bit in terms of
Sure.
the complexity of it.
Well, not that I'd remember, but it was February 10th, 1992, and I had a city council meeting. So let me set the stage for you. I got hired at the city of Brooklyn Park, someplace that Mike and I share. Mike was the assistant city manager there many years later. At the time, until Mike's boss, Jamie Verbrugge, every city manager from 1964 until Jamie left in 2015 or something like that, had left by being fired in that city. And of course, I got the job, sixth largest city in the state. I was 35 years old, feeling like I'm going to be the one to break the streak here. I'm all that in a bag of chips. So I am at this point hired by a city council that doesn't have Jesse Ventura on it, but I'd heard all these stories where he lives in the community and he'd come to the city council complaining about a development and he'd gotten into a shouting match. And so he was sort of lurking around the city council or circling the city council. So he runs for office. And of course, celebrities are going to get tremendous amount of attention. He beat a 20-year incumbent mayor, won all 20 precincts overwhelmingly, and he's there. Now, interestingly, they have a 7-member council. He was never in the majority all 4 years of his term. He had a 4-year term. First 2 years, it was a 2-5, and the second 2 years, it was a 3-4, and he was always in the minority. But what does a mayor uniquely have that the others don't? They have a gavel. And so he used that gavel, but he also used the fact that he was 6'4" and about 270 pounds and sort of intimidating. But what I did, and in retrospect, and what I talk about a lot at my workshop, what I did at the time was I walked out on the end of the plank and allowed people to cut it off behind me. If I wasn't the one to be out on the point, no one would. I used to have council members call me on Tuesday mornings after the Monday night council meeting and apologize for their weakness or their inability to stand up and be counted when it all went to hell. And what they would do, so I in my session on managing in dysfunctional environments, I juxtaposed Jesse with another mayor who was very prominent at the time, and the press was focusing on both of them. This guy, though, was bombastic, and he would berate people, and he was known for that, and he would just take it to excess. Jesse never did that. What he did is he had an entire group around him who actually promoted him to run for office so that they could then do all the stuff in the background. They had meetings once a week. They identified an agenda and talking points and who was going to say what and when they were going to say it and how they were going to say it. Ultimately, what occurred was I tried to make peace with him early on. I tried to work with him, but it had gotten to the point where right after my performance review had happened, it was a closed meeting, of course, And then all of us came down the back staircase. Now you're imagining we emerge behind the dais. There's an overflow crowd. All of the chairs in the chambers are full. There's a glass wall where you can see out into the lobby. There's people out in the lobby. And I'm going, gee, I didn't remember. Is there an assessment hearing, or is there some controversial items on the agenda? And I don't really remember that. Well, then I start looking out at the crowd. Oh, disaffected, person here, union person who hates my guts there. I can start to see, and then it's all of his minions, right? And and what they had on the end of the agenda to acknowledge that they had done my performance review, but all they're obligated to do is we held the performance review and we made some decisions. They don't have to detail it, and that's at the end of the agenda. First item of business, mayor gavels it into order. One of his people on the council says, I move to change the order of the agenda. Let's move the city manager's performance review to the number 1 position on the agenda. And is there a second? Second, boom, we moved it. So within head-spinning moments, somebody runs to the lectern. It's one of his cohorts. And for 2.5 hours unbroken, they came up and leveled most of the most vile kinds of things against me, some against the council, but they just went after me, hammer and tongs. It was just crazy. And I wasn't expecting it, of course. And they gave the good news is they gave me 3 weeks to get my thoughts together, and I asked for an opportunity to respond, but I needed time. So I did. But in those 3 weeks, I probably sent out 5 resumes. And the ridiculous part of this entire story, which I know has been very long, is that was February 10th. In 1992, I did not get fired officially until April 5th, 1995. I stayed for 3 more years of abuse. And I will tell you that when people ask me these questions all the time, I would never recommend that someone do that. I was too full of myself, and I was too invested in things I didn't need to be invested in, and I just powered through. Now, weirdly, during that 3 years, we were the number 1 city 1 year and the number 2 city the second year, ahead of Minneapolis and St. Paul for development. I became president of the Association of Metropolitan Municipalities. We were named the most innovative city in the metropolitan area. We had all these awards. We were doing all sorts of cool, really interesting stuff, but they still fired me. And as one of the council members said at the time when they announced this, well, he's really talented. He'll find another job in a hurry anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So, Corey, I don't know if you were the one that asked that question or who it was, but that's the Jesse story from a personal standpoint.
Craig, I want to pull on a string that you mentioned early on in that story, and thank you for telling the story, because it all came back to me. I've heard you tell it a couple of times, but you tell it way better than I ever could retell it. You said that you used to be the guy who would go out on the plank and somebody would cut it behind you. And it sounds like you knew that you were the guy who was going out on the plank and that people were going to cut it behind you. Why be that guy? Why do that?
And that is 100% the right question. And in the moment, the way I was looking, I was full of hubris and I was full of myself, honestly. That's just what it comes down to. I looked at it as the forces of evil are out here trying to tear down my city, and I'm going to go to battle with them, not realizing that my role was not a political role to go battle them. It was a support role in propping up the other council members who needed to go to battle. I assessed, and they frankly admitted in personal conversations, they didn't have the guts to do it or the fortitude to do it. So I kept trotting myself out there. Now, I changed tactics over time, but I felt like I was the bulwark against, all of what was happening. I would not recommend people do that. I think you should narrowly figure out your role.
Well, and I think that's an important point, because it is I think a lot of managers, I have been that person, and maybe not to the point where I'm, walking out at the end of the plank and it's getting sawed off behind me, but certainly where you see something that other people are not paying attention to, right?
Right.
You recognize the room. You see or you hear the statements that they should be picking up on. And the hardest thing in the world is to get them there on their own,
Right.
without being the one that throws themselves out in front of the huddled masses
Right.
and, in the Coliseum. And I think it's what I appreciate about your story is how you point to the fact that sometimes we just think we're the smartest one in the room, right? We get to that
Right.
place where nobody else can see it
Wait,
like we
Phil,
can.
I'm not.
Well, you are. I mean, I certainly am not. I can't speak for Mike. I know Corey is, but I can't
No,
speak for Mike.
no, you
But
are 100% right on that.
but
Yeah.
and so it's one of our Achilles heels, right? We find ourselves in a space sometimes where we know all the facts. We know all the political perspectives. We have the benefit of hearing from everybody, talking to everybody, and somehow we have to bring these divergent groups together, and we can't do it. And when we can't do it, that's when the fight is fun, right? That's when we jump in there, and that's when you find yourself all of a sudden at that end of that plank.
So I would make one more observation about this, because I know you have a lot of people that listen, and I hear a lot of talk about this issue or these sets of issues in city manager groups and rooms that are talking about this in some podcasts. But there is a difference depending on the size, scope, and complexity of the organization that you are working for. So somebody that's in a city of 5,000 versus somebody that's working for a county that's 1.5 million and has 10,000 employees, those are vastly different situations. Or even a city of 50,000 and a city of 500,000. And so you have political dynamics. The role of the CAO, or maybe even the ACAO, is different in vis-a-vis the board of the city council. You really don't want to cross an ethical line, obviously, but there is much more back and forth. There's you're a party to conversations, particularly at those largest or more political sized organizations, to things that you might want to go, oh, no, 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 I don't hear this, but you're in that room and they are talking about that. And you have to make choices about what you say and do, both publicly and in those rooms. But I do think it's one of those things that you have to get enough experience and talk to enough colleagues to be able to read those rooms and read those circumstances, because someday you will be in a job in a relatively small to mid-sized community that's very political and very savvy, and you will need to step up and you'll need to know what to do when you're called upon.
So, Craig, thank you for being so intentional and vulnerable with the depth of that story. There was a lot in there, and a few of my own scars kind of came to life as you're talking through it. One thing that I was thinking about as you were kind of walking us through that is the phrase courage is hard. And in my experience, I've seen council members who it was easier to push you off the plank than it was to do the hard thing in the moment. And so that story's not a fresh story. Your story's not particularly recent, but I think it probably sets great precedent for all of us to learn from. So can you kind of unpack that a little more?
Sure. And I would tell you, everybody likes to talk about the fact that social media has changed everything. And clearly it has made a dramatic difference in the lives of local government executives. It truly has. However, it rhymes with what happened, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Maybe I would say I entered the profession at a time where city managers immediately before me and 50 years before me were all engineers, and I entered the profession when it was professional managers, right? So I see that change, and so at that point, that's when these kinds of questions came to the forefront. And I think needing to understand about courageous decision making, needing to understand the difference between getting out in front, being political versus being tactically proficient at working with your elected officials is very important. But you do that in that fishbowl. Now, in my day, it was not social media, and thank God it wasn't. I mean, I'll just give you a couple of asides that have nothing to do with this, but I was city manager in two different places. In one city, our police department came in the middle of the night thinking they were going to attack somebody on a drug raid, battering ram down the door at 2 a.m., and it was the wrong apartment. And, could have gone sideways, didn't go sideways, but, whatever. In another community, I won't name it, but another community, I had an officer do a I just hate even repeating this because it's so unfortunate. Pulled somebody over. It happened to be a middle-aged Black woman. She had the license plate light was out on her car. That was the pretextual stop part of it. The ending of it was she was thrown in the back seat and basically beaten up by that officer whom we fired. And in both of those cases, that I just described to you, the people wanted apologies. They didn't want recovery. I mean, we would have paid millions. We would have been glad to do it. We fired this one guy. We, did other things. But can you imagine today how, it's a nanosecond and this blows up and you probably are the one out the door. And so I am under no illusions that management is different and harder today. But I will tell you that courage is still the same. So when you are needing to step up, the most courageous thing that I've ever personally witnessed, and he's a good friend, Kurt Bogany, who Mike Sable knows. Kurt was in Brooklyn Center when a guy named Dante Wright was shot by a Brooklyn Center police officer. And Kurt, doing the kind of thing that every city manager you would hope would do, he has the cameras trained on him, and the community is out for blood and saying, fire that officer and do whatever. And he said the officer will be given their due process and we will work on that immediately. And he's standing right next to a mayor who's ready to swoop in and say, we will do whatever. But and he said out loud, I'd have to defer to the manager because he's in charge here. And it was just, here's courage in action. He stood up in the glare of the national spotlight to do his job. And I am in everlasting amazement that he was able to do that in that moment. And I don't know that I would have been able to do that.
So I'm going to pick out one more thing you talked about in your story, and that was overstaying. So in modern times, and you guys are all in metros, I'm not, or not a large metro anyway. It's a little easier when you play round robin in a big metro. It often works out a little easier. But I think with the volatility of local elections, even as they are now, but I think people are wrestling with, do I risk the comfort of what I have? Do I overstay something chaotic? I mean, that when you talked about that, I had a little deja vu about why did I make that choice to stay with people who were ungrateful is the word I'll use. But what would you tell yourself, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself then?
If I would have been farther along in my career, maybe had a few more experiences with difficult environments like that, I would have had enough sense to analyze the politics of it. And I would have been able to say, okay, I can see that politically this isn't going to change, that this celebrity has control of the public opinion, whether he has political control or not. The community is behind him, and he has a bunch of people whose main goal in life was to tear down the power structure. They were actively working against the current council members and anything that, and they diagnosed correctly that I was the linchpin in that. So let's go after the city manager. Let's try to make him look bad. Let's attack. So what I probably would have done differently was I would have looked at that and said, okay, how can I make the most of this? And then, okay, where does that go? What would I do? I probably would have worked with council members. And then at some point, probably certainly not 3 years later, I would have made a strategic decision to exit. Now, if you'll permit me a moment, so I do this, and this is what I teach in my workshop. I have the 5 Bs, and this is a linear process that all managers go through who overstay their welcome or get fired. And it goes like this. First, you bargain. And what I mean by that is you bargain, you think, okay, I'm smart, they're reasonably smart, or maybe they are really smart. And we'll work it out. We'll come to some accommodation, and I'll help the disaffected. If they hate me, I'll find out why they hate me. And, maybe we can come to some accommodation. Failing that, which always happens, you then say, okay, they don't want anything to do with me. I'm going to take them on head on. Battle is the next B. So it's bargain, then it's battle. You want a piece of me, you get a piece of me. And then we can go there. And after you realize that you don't have the cards, they have the cards, you move to the third B, which is you buck up. Okay, I realize that I can't beat, I'm not going to be able to bargain with them. They're tougher than me. I'm just going to buck up, and whatever that means to you, stiff upper lip, keep your head down, do your job, whatever it is. Typically, that doesn't work either because they're still coming at you. Whether you are coming at them or not, they're still coming at you. Or they're coming at people around you who you're trying to protect, your department heads, other people in the organization, which leads to the fourth B, bunker. Ultimately, if you have exhausted all of those things and you still haven't the sense to leave, you get into your bunker. Now, that's a metaphorical bunker, but what I would relate it to in my career, I had the great good fortune. I had literally the best team around me. I had a person in every department head role, second to none, metro-wide. They were all great people, fantastic people. And they emerged around me as like a cocoon. We would go into the conference room in the city manager's office and we would just support each other. And it's like, okay, we're us and they're them. And we're going to stay in our bunker and make our plans and figure out how we get through this. Again, ultimately, the bunker mentality isn't going to serve you because you're just not moving things forward. That's a holding action at best. And so finally you come to the final B, which is bail, and often not at your choice. So it kind of goes that way. And I like to trot those out just to lay it out in front of someone. If a manager comes to me and say, I'm in it, I don't know what to do, I'll kind of go through that little quick 5 Bs and say, tell me what this looks like for you right now. Where are you? Or what would that mean? What would that look like?
So I want to use this as an opportunity to maybe pivot toward closer to today. But I want to acknowledge that I don't know. I know a lot of managers. I know a lot of managers who've gone through really tough times. I know a number of them who've been fired, who have struggled to kind of come to terms with whether they care about the profession after that, right? There's a lot of reasons not to. There's a lot of reasons to say from a self-preservation, from a mental health, from a physical health perspective, I'm done. I'm moving on to something else where I can have perhaps a little less anxiety in my world. And what I want to point to is the fact that while maybe you haven't been an in-practice city manager, you have not given up on the profession and you have not pointed yourself in a different direction, despite the fact that that may have been the better option. That may have been the more wealth-inducing option. That may have been the more fun option. And yet here you are still chatting with a bunch of us. And I know still talking with a lot of people, particularly in Minnesota. And I think this is a good opportunity maybe to pivot into for you and Mike to maybe talk a bit about the Compass peer groups and what you do and why you do it, because it's really an amazing initiative.
Sure. You alluded to the fact that I run something called Compass Peer Groups. I am a gigantic advocate for peer support of all kinds. This could be a therapy group, it could be a 12-step group, it could be a church group, it could be anything. It could be a True North group. Shout out to one of the 4 people in this podcast today. But I had the great good fortune in my first job in 1978 to be in, Mike will remember this, there was a guy named Don Salverda in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. He was a county commissioner, and on his side job was he was a leadership coach kind of guy, and he did peer groups for city managers, much like the Morrisons in the Chicagoland area, right? He wasn't a psychologist or psychiatrist, but he was a leadership guy. And the most valuable thing, I was in his first group, and I carried that through for almost 20 years. For about 10 or 15 years, I was in a group, and then he would tap me to come in and be the guest speaker for groups. I always had that itch, and so there was a break there. I met a guy named Dr. James Lynn, Jim Lynn, and if I don't mention him on this podcast, I'll be mad, and he'll probably be mad if he watches it. But he has made more of a difference in my life than probably any one single person. I stumbled upon Jim again. Dave Childs introduced the two of us. He said, "You should know him. You should know him." Jim was a seeker. Jim's a psychologist, PhD. And we both did Baldrige together. We both trained in the Purpose Project together. We both did Lean together. We wrote articles. We did the cover article on Baldrige for PM Magazine. We taught the first course in Lean Thinking for government in 2004 at an annual conference. So we did all that stuff. But the bigger issue for the two of us, in 2006, we did a bunch of test marketing for peer groups. And I had been thinking about this. Jim had been thinking about this. He'd been doing it with CEOs in the private sector. And we got a real great response. And almost at the exact same moment, Bob O'Neill offered me the job at ICMA. And so I abandoned that. But to make this long story even longer, when I was at ICMA, there was a survey that came out that said the top 2 needs that all the city managers pointed to was peer support and leadership development. And if you go through what ICMA has found over the last 15 years, those 2 are either number 1 or 2 almost all the time in terms of what members are looking for. So I'm done at ICMA. I come back with Jim and I said, "Jim, we've got to re-engage this." And so in 2011, we started Compass Peer Groups, kind of as a side project for the two of us. We still had other things we were doing. We started with one group, and today, almost 15 years later, we'll have, starting in 2026, either 12 or 13 groups and over 100 members. I was doing it, again, it was a tasteful side project with 4 or 5 groups for many years, and then we kind of ramped it up in the last few. And now we're expanding it to other places, other markets. Probably going to be doing some facilitator training in Illinois shortly. But the thing about that I feel so honored that I can be in rooms with, and just the ones that I facilitate. I have other facilitators that do this, but I have 6 groups myself. I talk to 60 city managers or assistant city managers every single month, or 10 out of 12 months every year. And I'm hearing what they're struggling with. I'm able to facilitate. I can use my wisdom or my half-baked ideas to help them manage this difficult profession. So I'm really proud of it, but it gives me far more than I give it.
So Craig undersold all of the value that comes from the Compass peer groups. There's articles in PM Magazine recently that highlights the value of this. He also mentioned True North Group, which is something I created in 2011 after an ICMA conference. The group that I have still exists. Dr. Corey Spiegel has done some academic research on this, right? Public service motivation or psychological capital. And so, Corey, I could just see you smiling. Who are watching the podcast, you have to come see our session. It's going to be a great. So, Corey, I know a lot of those things landed with you, and you. We have said this in a previous episode, right? You have benefited from peer support, personally, just in the last couple of years. We talked about the Austin conference being a really hard one. This is your second plug. Talk a little bit about the presentation. Talk a little about your research about how all of this sort of ties together.
So it's really funny to hear Craig talk about his own story and watch the mirror of my life through your storytelling. My dissertation was a therapy project. So
Oh, wow.
which very expensive one, and absolutely worth every piece of wisdom I got from it. So I studied turnover intention in city management. And Mike has, to this day, best hype man ever, because at the Pittsburgh conference, he helped me achieve a really remarkable research goal. And what I wanted to know, right? So public service motivation, highly studied in local government and all government, quite frankly. It's why we do what we do. You talked about service and the importance of service in your family.
Right.
So we all know that, but is that the so what? And as I was doing all of my pre-dissertation work, I stumbled into psychological capital. And there are lots of ways you can get around psychology in leadership, but that one just hit for me. And so working with my chair, my research question ended up being, which one matters more? Which one actually moves the needle on people wanting to stay? And not to give away the whole session, but we have talked about it enough on the podcast that the absolute most important thing, bar none, is optimism. And so when you're in a situation with a tough counsel or you experience a community tragedy or your personal life is a mess, whatever those resilient strains are, if you can't see forward with optimism, there's no way out. And so I think, both knowing Mike, the work you do, and he was my peer support. He was the guy that randomly knew on a Tuesday, I needed a text that said, checking in, how are you? It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a little friend moment. And so I can't fathom how important those peer groups are to the lives of the professionals that you're serving. And so I suspect it's already woven in there, but hope and optimism, the two most important factors there are for the current generation of managers.
I love that, honestly. Let me tie in the the money and the PhD. Jim Lynn and I, when we're in a room together, we'll talk to the group and say, we each have $100,000 invested in this. I have $100,000 worth of therapy, both individual, family, and whatever, and he has $100,000 worth of a PhD. So we come at this with a lot of investment. But ultimately, the way you were describing that, I was flashing back to, I wanted my team, when I went through my darkest times, to see that I was still moving forward, that I still had optimism, that they were in my care. And I don't want to say that, too, pedantically, but the point is that they needed to see that somebody was standing up in this darkness. And I wanted to be that person. And even if it was going to cost me my job, it was better that I'm out there doing that. And when I'm in these peer groups and when I hear about struggle or when I observe somebody thrashing around the way I did, sometimes I interject, but I love it if I can help facilitate the other people kind of enveloping them in that, and then helping them grab that optimism or see the positive in the dark times. And I really think that's one of the great gifts I get out of being involved in the peer group process.
So I would going way back to my question about the plank. I don't think it was all because you thought you were the smartest guy. I think a lot of it was what you just said, which is how do I make sure that I'm the one who takes the hit and not them, not the people that are doing the work that are behind me and around me and with me. I'm going to take the hit because that's my job. And I think I know, I don't think it, I know it of the three of you. That is the perspective of how each of you have provided the support to the people in your world. And sometimes that person has been me to move on to the next day and to keep, there's a reason we keep being optimistic. There's a lot of reasons, I should say. One of them is because your friends encourage you to be. Your friends tell you it's okay. I've been there too. I'm not going to tell the whole line, but it's a West Wing, it's a West Wing meme, and it talks of friendship. I will tell it because it's just too good. It's a guy falls in a hole, and he's yelling, "Hey, can somebody help me out?" And a doctor walks past, and the doctor writes him a prescription and tosses it in the hole and says, follow that and you'll get out. And the guy's like, that's not going to help me. So next comes a priest, and the priest writes a prayer down, drops it in the hole, and maybe you'll you get out that way. And the third person comes along, and that person's a friend, and that person jumps in the hole. And the guy's like, what are you doing? I don't need you down here with me. I need you to help me get out of the hole. And the guy says, yeah, well, I've been down here before and I know the way out, and I'm going to take you. That's peer support. That's what we're talking about when we talk about helping each other through those moments where you just don't want to. You don't want. Tomorrow isn't fun. It's not going to be a good day. It's not going to be great. And you know that if you've got somebody who can get you there, that you can make it better. It will get better. It will be perhaps still imperfect, but you can do it because that person is with you, or those people, that group. I have benefited from peer support my entire career. I couldn't do it. I'm in the Morrison group. I had a meeting last Friday, and it was one of the meetings where I talked a lot. And I walked out of that 2-hour session and I said, I feel better. I can do the things that I didn't think I could do when I walked in the room a couple hours ago. And that's what you guys are doing. And I can't respect it more. I can't be more grateful for that advocacy that you continue to provide to our colleagues.
Thank you. I mean, really, when you were talking about that, the one story, if there's only one story that I can tell about my peer group experience, it comes from my first group. In fact, it's the first person who registered to become a peer group member for that first meeting, December 2nd, 2011. He comes so he's in the OG group, and there were 12 members in that group. Many of them have retired, but there's still a core of, I think, 5 of those left. He came in, and his check-in that first meeting was, I think they're going to fire me. and so he basically took all the oxygen from the room for that whole meeting, because everybody kind of, enveloped him. Well, tell us about this. What's going on? What do you don't understand? What do you need? And ultimately, they launched him out of that meeting and said, you need to go meet one-on-one. You need to count the votes, and you need to be sure what's happening. So he goes out and he does what they tell him. Second meeting, he walks in the door. He goes, "Yeah, I'm down 3-2. I think they're gonna fire me." and literally, literally 2 days later, they fired him. So he's been in this group all of 6 weeks, right? The first meeting, and then a month later, they rallied around him. We kept him in the group. He didn't have another full-time city manager job for 18 months. Now, people hired him. They brought him in for projects. He had interim jobs, so he was making some money. But I gotta tell you, it was up and down, and he needed that peer group like nobody else. And he didn't have some money for a while. I comped him a membership for the second year. And the reality is that made all the difference in the world. And I still hearken back to that, all these many years later. I love the guy. He's still in the group. And I wouldn't be here doing all this stuff if it wasn't for people like him.
So that is a terrific story, and I know the individual that you're talking about, and I'm glad that the OG network is still there, because these jobs can be pretty hard, and you do, like, and Corey talks about it, and like, if you want to talk about right, watching what courage looks like I was just happy to send texts and like, offer some comfort. You did it with incredible grace and courage and professionalism. And so, like, that's why, and in a lot of ways, this podcast is kind of a peer group, right? It's passive for some of our listeners, but for the three of us,
Right.
I mean, this is just an opportunity to get together with people that we like and respect and want to hang out with. And so we're always happy to bring people in. So I'm going to pivot just a little bit. So Craig, you talked about your first Compass peer group meeting, first speaker, made you change the whole thing on the fly. I know you personally that you do improv, and you're trained at it.
Yeah.
How does the Venn diagram of city manager and improv practitioner work? Because can't be more than about 3 of you in the country. What drew you to it, and what are some of the lessons that you can use and
Yeah.
maybe give to our listeners?
Yes, and I will tell you, no,
I heard it. Yes, and that was pretty clever. I like that.
actually, it's mostly dumb luck and having a fantastic spouse who pushes you out of your comfort zone. So many people who know me know that I got remarried 10 years ago. My wife, Aida, is a free spirit. She's a performer. She was a fitness instructor it still is, for 50 years. And the reality is that she started her career as a dancer, and she's been many things, a Chicago Bulls cheerleader. She did all sorts of things. She was the boss of Phil's big sister, who was a yoga instructor at East Bank Club. Yeah. So the reality is that, in fact, let me do this. The Venn diagram is yoga. And so your collaborators, one of them has finished a 200-hour yoga teacher training, and the other has a big sister who is a yoga instructor and worked for my wife. So that's, how you draw the Venn diagram around city management and yoga. It all came together here on AuthenitiCity FM. I mean, I'm here for it. So in any event, so my wife is one of these people who she doesn't let the grass grow under her feet. She's got to be on to new and different. So we're living in Chicago, and she said, let's take an improv class. And I said, and you go ahead and do it. I'm all for you doing that. And so she got me to do this. It was the first 8-week portion of it. And I said, I'll do the 8 weeks, and then, you go ahead and take care of it. So then one 8-week session rolled into the next, and I was ready to quit. Every 8 weeks, I was ready to quit. By the time you get to the third level of the 5 levels, and it's a year-long program to go through the entire improv process at Second City, in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th classes, you have to perform on stage. So your class does a class performance. You got to sell tickets. You got to do the whole thing. And I have to tell you, it was the most fun, probably the most challenging, the most freeing kind of thing I've ever done. I met great people, most of them far younger than my wife and me, but they accepted us. I still am friends with many of them. I actually had a professional connection because one was a leadership coach. He lives out here in California now too. But the reality of improv is that it's so applicable to leadership and to life. I8 and I don't know, Phil probably, I don't know if you were in that, Phil, but we did a little improv thing at one of the ILCMA. Maybe it was summer, maybe it was winter, I don't remember, but we did something for ILCMA. And then we've done it around the country, and we also did an improv and storytelling at the annual conference back a number of years ago. So we parlayed it into something fun for us to do, but we apply it to not only to your life generally, but to leadership. So it's kind of a leadership lessons kind of approach too. And it's been just endlessly amazing for us. And I just as an aside, I have a son of my 4 children, my youngest of 4. He has had his own improv group since college. So they're just into their 20th year right now of having their own improv group.
Well, that is, I appreciate you sharing that, and I'm glad that the tradition is carried on through the family. I'm looking at Corey, I'm looking at Phil. So there's a bit that we do whenever we have guests, and that is, what is a question that you have for us? Because as you know, we don't put a script together. We don't really have a plan. We just kind of make it up. So it's our own little bit of improv. But what questions do you have for us, or what do you want to know from us?
So if you were not doing city management and money wasn't an object, how would you be spending your time right now?
Do I feel like I have to go first? Because
I
that
feel
kind
like
of is my story.
You have to go first.
So first you finish your doctorate. So I have taken my little time in the desert as the greatest gift I never knew I needed. And so every day I take my son to school and I pick him up. And never in my wildest dreams was stay at home mom on my bingo card, like ever. I would have probably been offended if you said I was going to do this 10 years ago.
Sure.
But he's about to be 13, and it's been the absolute greatest gift of my life. And then, as Phil got a little taste of last night, I've actually been writing a book. And my first degree is a journalism degree. I've never really used it directly, although I think we know how it all fits into city management. And so spending time thinking through how the little decisions we make every day, if we actually were more thoughtful about them, what our life could look like. Because I think we spend time on all these big moments, right? When we tell our story, it's all the big boulders. It's the marriage, it's the jobs, it's the getting fired, it's the moves, it's all those things. But that's not where the actual magic in life happens. The magic happens in these little ordinary moments that we forget to actually pay attention to. And so that's what I spend my days on right now, is writing a book. And so I think I'm living it. I feel very blessed to be doing it midlife. And that hopefully that becomes the next cornerstone for what I'll call the second half of my career.
I love that. I actually love that because I want to say you're living the dream, but that's too cliche. But the reality is that you're being true to yourself, and I like that a lot. Thanks. Okay, Phil, you're up.
So I have 2 different options that are very, very different from one another, but I could see great joy in both. So one would be I'd pull the Forrest Gump card, and I would cut grass or be in the dirt all day, every day, if I could. And not because I feel like I'm cultivating something perfect, but it's there's a lot of satisfaction that comes from the opportunity to see something get put into the ground and succeed and grow. So I guess maybe there's a little bit of a city management connection to that. The other is that I would love to be one of the Dapper Dans who walks around Walt Disney World or Disneyland and sings these, goofy barbershop quartet songs that everybody everybody stops and they're like, oh my God, the Dapper Dans are here. Let's listen to them. And because that's what I do. And we have a friend who always sends me a Dapper Dan reel on Instagram and says, here's your retirement gig. Here's your retirement gig. Don't forget about your retirement gig. So yeah, I'd love to do that. I think it would bring me a lot of joy.
I love it. Thanks.
I don't know that I can follow that because the number of memes and things that we are going to do, we're going to use that information. We're going to get you a Forrest Gump t-shirt. We're going to have to get you a Dapper Dan outfit. Like, I'm a little bit overwhelmed by what I just heard. So it's going to take a moment. All seriousness, I've never been asked this question. And I would think at some level, one of my first jobs ever, I worked in a liquor store, and you stock shelves, and you were usually relegated to the sort of the lifting the heavy objects. But then at the end of the night, you would have to clean the store, and so we would all pitch in a couple of dollars. We would grab a bottle of wine off the shelf, and I joke that I literally drank my way around the world mopping a store. And so if money were no object and I didn't have, I would probably work in the wine business because like something like Phil, right? You can take something that grows from dirt into this beautiful thing, and that the process of like it tells a story, and then it ends up in a glass, and right, it's usually a celebratory kind of a thing, and um, being part of that journey of making something, pulling something from the ground and transforming an event into something magnificent is probably what I would do, and probably will be a retirement career for me. I would love to just do wine tastings and pour wine and tell stories and just hang out with friends. Like, that would be a perfect kind of career for me.
I love it. I love it. I'll sign on to that.
All right, so we don't have a script, as we always talk about. So, but we are kind of wrapping up on our podcast. Corey, Phil, final questions.
What's your biggest bit of advice? So we talk about retention, we talk about kind of the journey. If I'm 22, and as we've dug into our own podcast metrics, we have some young
Right.
people who are interested in us, which is fascinating. What's the advice you give them around service going into the next era, right? Because if you look around us
Yeah.
right now, it's not particularly our best moment in history. How do you create the spark for what really is a very meaningful profession?
I would give different advice to a 22, 23-year-old than I would give to a 35 to 45-year-old that I would give to a 50-year-old. So in general, the one piece of advice that I think transitions everything would be to stay open to what comes at you. So here's what I mean by that. The world, the universe, you fill in that word, will tell you what you need to know, but most of us are just closed off to it. And I have had to learn that lesson. I don't know if it's 25 different times, but it's been a lot. And at the end of the day, I have been most successful, most calm, and most grounded when I have allowed those messages to wash over me, and I've been in a less chaotic mind to hear it. And so I would say to that young person, everything's ahead of you. You will still have choices. You can fail and still recover. So keep pushing the things that make sense to you in that moment. Get as much advice as you can, but just, pull the trigger, go. And, as you get farther along, I think the idea is, what is the purpose of everything I've done for the last 10 or 15 years? Is this still serving me in this stage of my life? And is service the same to me as it was? Am I becoming jaded? How does that work? And your life circumstances are going to, somewhat dictate that. I make this big point in some of the things I write and some of the things I talk about today is you can only be a person of your time. So I am a person of my time. However, next month at the peer groups, I've created an AI artifact, and I'm going to do this live demonstration with my peer groups on the Leadership Challenge AI artifact that I developed. Well, nobody's expecting that from me at my age, but you know what? It's still my time. But ultimately, I can provide context for that. You can do things in your window of time as it shifts forward to think about, okay, I'm of this time. How much is left? What have I learned from behind? How can I add? Who can I interact with? What can I learn? I think if you take that as a mind, take the growth and learning mindset and apply it to the framework of I am of my time, that will help you navigate whatever you're doing. I'm at the end of my career, my life journey. And so I'm thinking about what wisdom I can impart or how I can, help the next person up. I'm not pulling the ladder up. I'm putting the ladder back down so that they can climb up. And I want to be able to do that for as long as I can.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question, but I'm going to say something else first, which is not a question, but more of a point of gratitude to you for spending some time with us tonight and talking and being the person that I've always known you to be, which is Craig Rapp. You are who you are. You have always been authentically yourself in every encounter that you and I have had. And I'm always grateful for that because I just don't think it's something that we experience frequently in the profession, in life. And to express my gratitude for being somebody who I can say is a city management hero of mine. So thank you for being yourself and being with us and having this very deep conversation. I think, as you're kind of reflecting that you feel like maybe now is the those that point in your life where maybe you're not going to try something new. But
Yeah.
that's my question. What's the next new thing you're going to try?
I'm going to try to keep that light from either staying off or on.
I like
and I wanted to
I
point
like
out
it.
for
It's a
I
little
wanted to point out for
poltergeist-like.
continuity's sake for anybody who's watching this is just after I made this deep philosophical thing about the universe that the light popped on, and I'd like to be able to say that I had some little clicker here that I turned this on, but I think I have a short in the light. So, full
Actually, that's
disclosure.
Mike. Mike's doing that. He's
Yeah,
just not telling
exactly.
you.
So interesting that you should ask me that question. So as you know, so I've lived around a lot of places. I grew up in Minnesota. I managed there, raised my kids there. I moved to DC. I lived in Chicago for a long time, and now I live in Palm Springs. But I commute back and forth doing all this stuff. Probably one more move in us to another part of California. Probably that next move, I'll probably recede from these businesses. Other people will take over. And I am going to do, I am going on to the next thing. I have already got 110 blog posts and a distribution channel plan. So I'm going to go back 20 years and do blogging instead of podcasting. But at the end of the day, if you know Seth Godin, and I would highly recommend anybody who doesn't know him to check him out. It's going to be in that style, and I still am going to continue to do a lot of content development. I do a lot of content development for my peer groups. I didn't even talk about that side of it. Half of my peer group has my peer groups have a mission. We are all about peer support and leadership development. So half the session every month is check in and support. The other half is a very deep dive into a subject, which we don't dive too deep because the time isn't there, but I have a robust set of materials and things. So you can keep your credentialing up simply by attending the peer group. And I do a lot of that. I do all that content development myself. So I'll probably, I'll be on my deathbed with my laptop sort of, doing that one last content memo. So, but it'll be in a really beautiful place.
You've made some sort of deal with somebody, because admittedly, I know you keep saying to us that you're getting older. I would argue that you look younger today than you did 20 years ago, which really pisses me off. I just want you to know.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
So, Craig, it has been our pleasure to have you on. We are friends, we are colleagues, and so I knew that when we did this little journey that you would be one of the people that we would want to talk to. I have a tremendous amount of respect for you, and I have loved the opportunity to work with you. And as you shared, our careers have overlapped a couple of different times, and so it's always something I look forward to. I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, I really am honored to be part of this. You folks are doing great work. You're filling up tremendous space in the not only the podcast world, the local government world. What you're doing the positive work. There's enough negativity out there. There's enough, we get that every day, 24/7. We need authenticity and positivity, and you guys are filling that space. So hooray for you. And I'm really just thrilled to have been part of it, small part of it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, this is also the opportunity that we're obligated to do the Victor Cardness. Please like and subscribe on all of the platforms that you have. Give us feedback. Just be part of the journey. So thank you.
Here's one for my LinkedIn page.